Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Donald Trump standing by those anti-Muslim tweets that he retweeted on his personal account, even engaging in a bit of diplomatic Twitter feud with the Prime Minister of Britain, Theresa May. With us to talk about it from Houston, Craig Considine, who teaches at Rice University. His upcoming book, Muslims in America, Examining the Facts. Welcome back as well to Joshua Mitchell, who teaches at Georgetown University, the author of Tocqueville in Arabia, Dilemmas in a Democratic Age. He's with us from Stanford, California. Here in the studio, Stuart Haugen, former president of Republicans Overseas, and from Washington, Eric Bain, reporter at Reason Magazine. Now, ever since Donald Trump campaigns on the platform of that Muslim ban and the wall to keep out the Mexicans, he's continued to court controversy once in the White House. Shana Bhattacharya has more.
For some, the answer is obvious. Others deny the charge. But the question is more pressing than ever. Has Donald Trump gone too far? In less than a week, Trump targeted Muslims with a series of retweets from the account of a far-right British leader. He also referred to Congresswoman Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas, a historical Native American figure, as he addressed Native American veterans. Many took it as a slur.
You were here long before any of us were here. Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. But you know what? I like you.
The White House press secretary denied it was an insult.
I don't think that it is, and I don't think that was certainly not the president's intent.
Still, civil rights groups and leaders like Reverend Al Sharpton have been sounding the alarm.
But I certainly think he plays racism, he channels it, and he has used every opportunity to forward it.
Even before he was elected, Trump was accused of encouraging his most violent supporters and paying lip service to hate groups. His attacks against Hillary Clinton included a tweet believed to be anti-Semitic, charges he repeatedly denied.
The only people giving a platform to these hate groups is the media itself and the fake news.
Hate crimes have skyrocketed in recent months. The FBI says they reached a 5-year high in 2016, with a strong uptick in the last quarter of the year around the election.
Stuart Haugen, hate crimes on the rise?
Yeah, maybe, but I don't see, as far as I know, they're not rising from the right, they're rising from the left. It's the Black Lives Matter, Antifa, et cetera, that is causing, I don't see any indication statistically that hate crimes are rising from the right. It's a horrible thing no matter what. I would like to jump back to, a couple of things that our other interlocutors raised, that jihad camps do exist in the United States. Let's not be foolish about that. All over, in many places in the States, you can go online and find them. They're documented by the CIA and by the FBI.
Jihad camps?
Yeah. There are cells developed in the States. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to just go in and take them out. So much for this, attack mentality that we're supposed to have. They do exist. And I doubt, I'll ask any of your other collaborators here.
Craig Considine, in researching for your book, have you found traces of jihad camps?
No, and what the participant just said is the definition of fake news. There are no jihad camps in the United States.
Craig. Excuse me. Send me your email address, and I will send you information. I am not somebody who propagates false news or fake news. This is not. You're not being honest here.
You should have facts.
I do have facts.
You should have facts to back it up.
Oh, well.
So what are they?
I just said there are several.
The most notorious. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. I'll send you. You send me your email address, and I'll send you the information. They exist.
I think the point. Well, maybe the point that we're missing here is that whether you think jihad camps exist in the United States or they don't, and I would side here and say that I don't know of any evidence that they do, but maybe they do. Regardless of which side of that debate you might be on, I don't see how the president tweeting these videos of purported Islamic extremism. I don't see how that helps us solve that problem, right? All that does is create more tension. Maybe it even it creates more certainly religious tension.
Well, wait,
it creates political tension.
Is this the same sort of argument? Is this the same sort of argument that would say that we should not confront North Korea about nuclear weapons? That we should just kick the can down the road? Seriously,
I would say that Trump shouldn't be confronting North Korea over Twitter about nuclear weapons, just like he probably shouldn't be confronting.
Should Barack Obama have been confronting North Korea?
No, but the question's about Twitter. The question's about Twitter.
Wait, no, it's really not. The communication methodology is irrelevant.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is. On Politico, reporter Annie Carney quotes sources who claim Trump doesn't use that DM, that direct message function on Twitter, but he often looks at tweets on his mention part of his handle and picks up links and videos there. The article goes on to say that the conversation on Twitter then often dictates his thinking. Everybody's talking about this. He will tell his top aides in the West Wing, referring to a clip or an article he saw circulating among the small group of Twitter users that he follows. Does that give outsized credence, Stuart Haugen, to people who perhaps aren't the most competent to talk about some of the important issues that you've mentioned?
Maybe, maybe not. I guess my argument would be I think these are relevant issues. I don't always support the way Donald Trump approaches them, nor the way he communicates them. But I certainly didn't support the way George W. Bush or Barack Obama did either. I just think that we're getting the issues out in front of the world, and I don't care if they're done by Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
Joshua Mitchell, who professed to us that he is not on Twitter in part one of our discussion. Your thoughts on Donald Trump's decision-making?
I will say, in accordance with what an earlier guest said, it seems to be very incoherent, but I want to be clear, he doesn't have a team. And he's acting like a businessman acts. And while I never watched the show, while it was on, I have gone back and watched The Apprentice. His method is to let chaos rule until something coherent emerges. So what he's doing in the White House is perfectly consistent with a businessman's method. Let me return to what I took to be the substance of your question earlier, or based on your observations. Look, the question is whether globalism is going to prevail or whether national borders matter. And the question is, are we going to deal with people in a multicultural way where we pretend there are no real cultural differences and we simply celebrate everything? Or are we going to have to make hard choices about citizenship? I am not on the right, which is to say kind of reactionary and pushing toward blood and soil, but neither do I think the left has anything to offer on this except platitudes about global citizenship and respecting everybody. There's a middle position, which is a liberal position, which says that borders matter. And there's a middle position that says that cultural differences matter. Now, Trump might exacerbate all of these issues. I concede that. But this is the question of our time. And I believe that's why he was elected, was because people in the United States have simply had enough with platitudes about globalism and multiculturalism. Trump is not going to be the one that solves this problem. There's a very famous passage from Tocqueville right at the beginning of Democracy in America where he says, after the warrior comes the lawgiver. We are at a warrior stage right now in American politics where everything is being disrupted, and Twitter is the idiom for that.
Craig Considine, you agree?
Well, if we're going to talk globalization, and I'd like to bring a group like ISIS into the discussion. This is obviously a transnational group of people influenced by globalization, influenced by the breakdown of order. The use of social media is a tactic that ISIS uses to recruit individuals. But my point here is this. When Donald Trump retweets these propaganda videos, there are ISIS members, ISIS sympathizers, however you want to call it, that are literally giving him the thumbs up because Donald Trump is pushing the narrative of the Islamic tradition and of Muslims in the West that they want to see. They want to, and this is a stated goal of ISIS in their propaganda magazine, Dabiq, they want to eliminate what they are calling the gray zone. And the gray zone is the space It's very fluid. It's hybrid. It's where people from multiple faith backgrounds, cultural backgrounds can come together and to synthesize all their identities, and they can be at one. They can be American and Muslim at the same time. So when Donald Trump is retweeting these videos, he is giving ISIS the exact fuel to the fire that they seek. So from a strategic perspective, it's a massive blunder.
Eric Boehm, this Twitter world that we live in now, redefining politics. We saw it with the result of last year's elections. Joshua Mitchell making the point, the fact that radical groups are transnational. After all, Trump retweeting a British group in this instance. How's that impacting politics where you are? Does the rest of Washington get it?
Well, I think that last point is exactly right, and it really goes both ways. Not only is Trump emboldening ISIS and the other extremists out there who want to see the elimination of that gray zone. They want to think that they want Muslims in America to think that Muslim values and American values are incompatible. But then he's also he's also propping up that extreme far right-wing agenda, like the one that Britain First pushes, and we saw how happy they were to retweet his retweets or to praise his retweets yesterday. Just like when he sort of gave aid and succor to the white nationalists that gathered in Virginia a few months ago, when he refused to condemn them and said that there were bad people on both sides or whatever. I mean, this is the game that the president continues to play, and I think it's a strategic blunder, as the previous commenter said, to continue to do that. To your question though, is this the new age of politics and Twitter? I mean, I think you kind of have to separate out the politics of Twitter from the individual way that President Donald Trump uses Twitter, which is different, I think, from the way most politicians do, and the way Twitter has indeed transformed the way we conduct politics in this country and around the world. But I mean, as President of the United States, he's got access to any and all information that he could possibly want, right? I mean, he has access to information that you or I would never be able to see or read. And if he's learning the important issues of the day from the few people he follows on Twitter, I think that raises serious questions about his own judgment and about his own, where he's getting the input that will lead to potentially, very important decisions that have to come out of the White House every single day.
Eric,
Gentlemen,
I was just going to say, in a little under 2 weeks' time, there's going to be a by-election for the U.S. Senate in Arkansas, and there, Roy Moore, he's called for a ban on Muslim legislators. Is the result of that going to be something that we can extrapolate from that will tell a lot about the United States, or is it a local race?
In Alabama, not Arkansas, but they're close, right? But they're in the South. I mean, I think it is all politics are ultimately local. Senate elections are statewide elections, so I mean they're a little bit more significant in terms of the national picture than, let's say, a congressional race would be. But there are obviously very significant issues at play here that go beyond the politics of either candidate, that go beyond calling for something like a ban on Muslim legislators. There are allegations against Roy Moore that he was dating a teenager when he was in his 30s, and all sorts of other things along that lines. So that race will, rightly or wrongly, be looked at as something of a national bellwether. I think the circumstances there, particularly the circumstances surrounding Roy Moore, who's the Republican candidate there, in what is a deeply Republican state and a state that Republicans should win easily, I think it makes it difficult for me to say that race will necessarily give us any kind of indication of which direction the country is trending. But every one of these by-elections, as you call them, do sort of give us some sense of that. I think next year's midterms really will be the true judgment of how the American people are looking at not just the president, but at his Republican colleagues in the House and Senate.
Joshua Mitchell?
Well, just very quickly, one of the things that's very fascinating to me about this conversation is it's digital in the following way. So if you're not left, you must be far right. There's no question but that Trump can be seen as supporting the far right. And there are many people on the far right who believe his message is a far right message. But let us remind ourselves here, Trump has been a Democrat most of his life. There is something between far right and left, and that's called liberal. And we have lost that middle ground, both in Europe and in America. And so when Trump says things about borders, et cetera, I see this as perfectly consistent with a liberal position. Because you believe in borders doesn't make you a member of the far right. Let me return to something about ISIS, which I think was absolutely right. Yes, they're trying to eradicate the gray zone. But Donald Trump is not going to be decisive in this matter. The question is, how is Europe going to respond to this? How is America going to respond to this? And this is going to take decades to work through. And it's simply not clear to me that you have on the left resources to be able to address this ISIS challenge. Because the way it's happening now is they're basically trying to do everything on the left to suppress the question at all for fear that they're handing themselves over to ISIS. And I think this is a terrible strategy. It's a way in which Europe will lose its cultural integrity, and I think its cultural integrity matters. When I was in Qatar for years, for 12 years off and on, if you are a Christian, you're never going to become a citizen. There are multiple countries, most countries around the world have very clear criteria about membership. Why is it that in America and in the West, or in Europe in particular, you have to completely renounce everything and give up everything? This is silly. Now, this doesn't mean you have to take a position where you are anti-Muslim. That's the pathology of the current moment. We have to be liberal. We have to admit certain sorts of peoples. We have a long tradition of religious liberty in this country. It's a grand one. My family came through it through Lebanon. This is wonderful. But a country is a country and has to defend itself and its cultural heritage.
Wait, hang on a second. Defend its cultural heritage. Does that mean that the United States has to have a stated preference when it comes to religions?
No, not at all. But you have to understand, America is not a Christian country, but it is largely a country of Christians. And it seems to me that we have to somehow come to grips with this. I don't have an answer to it. But cultures matter. Cultures are what determine what nations are. And I do not believe in being enclosed. Of course not. My family could not have come to this wonderful country had there not been a kind of openness. So I want that to be retained. But you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater and pretend that the legacy of nations doesn't matter. It does. And our crisis right now is on the right. They're trying to answer this by saying, all immigrants go. That won't work. And on the left, they're saying, we're going to answer this by saying, no, history matters. Our culture doesn't matter. We believe in everyone but ourselves. That won't work either. And that's the crisis of our times.
I think that's the right perspective here, in the sense that I would describe myself as a classical liberal too. I think liberal values are really under attack both from the left and the right, and so I agree with you on that point. I struggle with the idea that we need to somehow exclude certain religions or certain cultures, because I thought freedom of religion, freedom of expression, all of that is tied up. That's very tightly wound up with the ideas of liberalism.
Of course, but you're missing what's happening. When I moved from Virginia to Maryland, I had to have so many pieces of identification it wasn't even funny. And yet we've got countries of the world that have no way of telling us, yes, this person who wants to come to your country has the following documentation and is safe. They can't even give us that documentation. That's the concern I have. Whether they're Muslim or not, I don't much care. But if I have to have documentation to move from Maryland to Virginia and vice versa, it seems to me that we ought to have similar requirements for people coming from regions of the globe where, in fact, there's tremendous travail. The Middle East is a cauldron right now. They're wrestling with the question of whether they want to be modern or anti-modern. And so you have the hyper-modernization of Dubai and Qatar and all the rest conjoined with the tribalism and the re-enchantment movement of ISIS. It's a deeply troubled zone.
Deeply troubled zone. Craig Considine, very quickly before we go, what are this polarization that Joshua Mitchell was describing in the research you've done for your book? Have you witnessed this in the United States?
Well, I'd say this in light of this discussion of polarization and links to national security, and whether we need, or whether the United States should bring in Muslims from around the world. I think it's important to remember that Islam and Muslims, the Islamic tradition and Muslims, have always been a part of the United States. They go way back. They were migrants a long, long time ago, and they have already successfully intertwined their faith and their cultural background and their national identity. Through my research, I found that the overwhelming majority of American Muslims are mainstream Muslims. They're contributing in all facets of life. There are doctors, there are lawyers, there are musicians, there are athletes. So to suggest that we need to be careful to not let in Muslims around the world, I think it's doing a great disservice.
Did not say that. No, please do not misquote me. Did not say that.
I didn't even quote you, and I didn't misquote you. I'm just stating the research that I found and the facts that I found. I think there's a tendency to conflate Muslims out there with Muslims on American soil, and that if we let them in, they're going to be somehow different from the regular American. And if you just look at history, I mean, waves and waves of Muslim migrants have come to the United States, and they've made a living here, and they're just as American as any one of us on this panel.
Don't confuse the two. Craig Considine, I want to thank you for joining us from Houston. I want to thank Joshua Mitchell in Stanford, California, Eric Boehm in Washington. Stuart Haugen, stay with us. Media Watch is next. Let me say hello to Sanam Chantier.
Hello.
A lot of outrage in the UK.
Yeah, it's been incredible. The reaction has been very strong from all ends of the political spectrum, Francois, with even those from Theresa May's own cabinet queuing up to suggest that Trump's expected visit to the UK should be cancelled. We'll start off with a tweet from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who actually comes out to say that this post is a betrayal of the relationship. It's going to come up shortly, I hope, between the UK and the US. He said on Thursday that President Trump has used Twitter to promote a vile extremist group that exists solely to sow division and hatred in our country. There's that tweet. And we have to remember, François, there's a backstory here. Sadiq Khan had previously been personally targeted by Donald Trump regarding his reaction to the London Bridge terror attacks. Now, another tweet that stood out to me, which is very strong, is from the British ambassador to the US, Kim DeRock, who says that the British people overwhelmingly reject the prejudiced rhetoric of the far right. And he actually says that he has raised the concerns with the White House. And of course, Theresa May has come out to condemn these retweets several times, but she's made sure that the relationship between the two nations isn't necessarily brought into a question as a result of these inflammatory tweets. And she, of course, has said that the visit still very much stands, a decision that has been questioned across the board. Now, looking beyond these lawmakers, there have been reactions from various people in the religious community. I'll start with a tweet from the Muslim Council of Britain, who says that we cannot give such bigotry a pass. Now, the Church of England has also lent its voice to this wave of condemnation. We have a tweet from Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, calling on Trump to urgently remove his retweets from his feed. I want to leave you with a slightly lighter tweet, which I noticed. It's from a satirical account. It's actually called British First, and it goes with a Muslim-trained pigeon hurls man onto train track, tweeting that at Donald Trump. And there's another one here, which is of a dog owned by illegal immigrants chucks man in the sea again, tweeted at Donald Trump, possibly as far-fetched as those tweets that we've seen from the US president himself, because they've not been verified.
The media coverage has been intense on both sides of the Atlantic.
And François, as journalists, I think we often have this dilemma of when Trump tweets, is it news or not? And certainly in this case, it appears to be so. And there has been an array of coverage. I'm going to start off with this opinion piece on the New York Times, Trump Proxy of Racism. In this essay, Charles Blow talks the reader through all the different incidents over the recent months in which Donald Trump hasn't necessarily followed the normal rules or tones of politics. In other words, he's been racist. And of course, you have that image, the iconic image of the ceremony where the war veterans, the Native Americans are being honored. And he refers to his favorite racial slur against Elizabeth Warren and calls her a Pocahontas. Another incident is the revelation by the Times recently that Donald Trump is having closed-door conversations questioning the legitimacy of Barack Obama's birth certificate, and the list really does go on. Another article that you and I spoke about earlier today is by Politico here. It's a great article because it talks about how Trump's off-the-cuff tweets served to derail his administration's message, and of course it sent various staff members scrambling to do damage control.
Yeah, John Kelly's the chief of staff.
Absolutely, he's the chief of staff.
Does that John Kelly doesn't have much of a grip on Trump?
Well, he's not supposed to. He works for the president. By the way, I don't in any way, shape, or form accept the fact that calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas is a racial slur. And by the way,
you're disagreeing that that's a racial slur?
Oh, absolutely, it's not. And by the way, what you missed was the fact that the Navajo code talkers, in their response, said, I saw nothing wrong with it.
I wasn't talking about the reaction. I'm just talking about the coverage from the media.
But the media. No, but that's what we're doing. We're reacting to the U.S. media, who is constantly at Donald Trump's throat.
Oh, I see. So we're Trump supporters. I am
a Trump supporter. Yes, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
But that changes your coverage of the news?
No, I'm going to continue with what I was talking about earlier.
See, but we've already touched on the problem.
Yeah, but François asked me about John Kelly, so I'm going to continue on that because we know that John Kelly has previously tried to
John Kelly has said very publicly, it's not my job to control the president's communication.
Actually, sources close to the White House said that he previously tried and he failed. Something that various high-ranking officials across the world
again, the American media, sources close to, not sourced, not defined, and not confirmed.
According to you. So you can delegitimize journalists if you wish so, if that's the case. I don't have this because I wasn't the journalist that personally covered that story.
Give me a confirmed source.
It comes from the New York Times. It's not my
opinion. The New York Times is the biggest adversary of Donald Trump.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. But I want to thank
Son
of Chantier. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.